Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
Hey, what's up, Jason?
Not a whole lot, unfortunately, some sad news. Wes Unseld, the legendary Washington Bullet, Baltimore Bullet as well, of course. One of the probably the greatest players in that history. Yeah.
Let us not forget the Capital Bullets. Yeah.
I would never forget the Capital Bullets. He has passed away at age 73. He was, or 74, excuse me. Just had turned 74. He was one of, it was an era in which, the NBA and the pro basketball world with the ABA was very, very unsettled. Just, so much turmoil, so many new teams, so many new faces, so much changing around, social change, all that. But, Wes Unseld was a stable star in an era of instability.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're going to talk a lot about his career and sort of the stuff he did. But yeah, one of our most fascinating things, and one of my favorite things that we ever did in Over and Back was, the basketball mysteries of the 1970s. And we talked a lot about Wes Unseld. We talked a lot about the Bullets, and we talked a lot about that era in general and that entire decade, which just weirdly, I don't want to say lost to history, but just not represented very well. I mean, you got Wilt and Russell, right, and everybody knows about that. And then you just kind of go, hey, Magic and Bird, hey, here we go. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on. There was 10 years there that you just completely missed. And it's a weird decade because there's a lot of champions. There's not really one dominant team. Yeah, you have Kareem there, but like he's not winning the title every single year like you kind of assume he should be. You got the Bullets and the Sonics win titles. Like the Suns are contending. The ABA is here. It's just a very weird decade that, again, most basketball, when you talk to people, it feels like, Russell, Wilt, then, Magic Bird. It's like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this decade. And Wes Unseld, even though the numbers aren't too gaudy, and we'll talk about him here a little bit, is arguably one of the biggest figures in that 1970s. And those Bullets teams, I think don't get enough credit for being in the finals as many times as they were and being as dominant of a team as they were. I know even I was a little bit surprised when today they said, hey, Wes Unseld passed away, and he was in the NBA finals 4 times. And I'm like, wait a minute, 4 times, really? And then you do the math and you're like, oh yeah, he was in the finals 4 times in the 70s. Like, that's tremendous. That's a huge accomplishment. But for whatever reason, that entire era and that entire decade is just kind of not forgotten, but just sort of underappreciated or whatever. And like, yeah, you're right. It was just a time of a crazy turmoil in professional basketball.
Right, and it's an era that's hard to parse. I think it's an era that's hard to like easily define in a few words. Where the preceding eras, I think it's easier because the focus is on a small number of teams who won a lot of championships and a small number of stars. Where like I said, the number of great era-defining players who were winning championships every year wasn't really there in the 70s.
Yeah.
But Unseld, came extremely close. He's not quite at the level of star of some of the other greats of all time, although he did make the top 50 all-time greatest list in 1996. He was only one of 2 players other than Wilt Chamberlain to be MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same year in 1969. Really impressive accomplishment. And he, somebody has to have this mark, but he averaged 13.8 points per game, 18.2 rebounds, which is the lowest points per game average for any MVP in history.
Right, and some people might see that as a negative, and I absolutely get it why you'd be like, oh, geez, this is a negative. But I find that the exact opposite. I find it as an absolute positive of like, that just shows how tremendous he was and how much he influenced that team. And I mean, the team made a huge turnaround in the 1 year that he was there. I mean, he comes in, they win 57 games, they make the playoffs for the first time in that entire franchise's history. Prior year to that, 36 wins. So I mean, he obviously was a guy who tremendously changed around that entire franchise, influenced them in a ton of ways. And, whether or not you want to give it equal credit to whatever, I mean, it doesn't matter. MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same year. I mean, nobody besides Wilt has ever done that. And there's been a lot of great players to join the NBA and a lot of players that were good right off the bat, and none of them reached those highs. And yeah, some people might see that as a negative that he scored, only that amount of points a game in his MVP season. I see it exactly the opposite. I see it as, well, look how you couldn't deny him despite the fact that he wasn't just prolific scorer and a guy that really affected the game in that way, but just that he affected the game in so many other ways, the points, the assists, the outlet passes. That's what we'll talk about a lot this episode as well, that maybe he didn't get a lot of credit When you look at his assist numbers, they're not super gaudy, but then you watch highlights of Wes Unseld, and every single highlight is him getting a rebound, tossing the ball halfway down the court, and a point being scored immediately after that. And, whether or not the scorers were properly scoring assists or whatever, it doesn't matter. I mean, he clearly influenced the game in so many different ways. And yeah, again, I don't see it as a negative that he only scored, 13 points a game in his MVP season. And I will say this as well. He's a guy that if you look at his high school, you look at his college numbers, a guy that could score and if he needed to, had the ability to score. But I think largely, and again, you watch those highlights and you see a guy who realized that maybe I don't need to be the top scorer. Maybe I don't need to be that guy. Kind of in the mold of a Bill Russell. Bill Russell could probably have scored 24 points a game if he really wanted to, but kind of said, you know what, I'll get a rebound, I'll start the fast break, we'll win a bunch of games. Who cares? We'll win a championship. We'll go to the NBA Finals 4 times in the decade. So that's something that's always pretty cool about Wes Unseld. And real quickly before we get into some of his NBA career as well, an interesting note that I kind of learned about today, believe it or not, is University of Kentucky. Adolph Rupp was the coach for many, many years at Kentucky. The first black player, I guess it's relevant, anecdote, especially to today as all this stuff going on in the world today. The first black player ever recruited by Kentucky as well. And there was also the note too that Wes, they kind of said, hey, if you have a friend that's also black that would like to play at Kentucky, that'd be great too, because he needed a roommate, because it was like, all right, well, you can't just have one black guy come to Kentucky. Then what's he going to do? Who's he going to stay with? Where's he going to go? And all that sort of stuff. And it's just like, oh my God, you think about it and you're like, what decade is this? And it's like, then, today's things go on and you're like, oh, well, geez. Like,
sure. Yeah. I mean,
it hasn't changed all that much. So.
I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but obviously it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
The progress that we've made is fleeting for sure. Yeah, I mean, you talking about his skills. I mean, he was definitely, other than the outlet passing, not really a flashy player. Really known for, setting great screens, for, being a really good defender. He was undersized for a center he was listed at 6'7". I guess he was actually closer to 6'6", but he was extremely burly, able to punish his opponents, known for, strong picks, very quick hands, great anticipation, just, one of these guys who was more of a star role player, who you could be, one of these guys who was one of the greatest players in NBA history, despite not really scoring. And early on in his career, he did score more. I mean, he averaged his first 5 seasons, he averaged close to 15 points per game, averaged around 17 rebounds per game. So was scoring fine. And then later on in his career, he dealt with injuries. He teamed with Elvin Hayes starting in 72. Hayes, obviously, pretty famous for liking to score. Also, Phil Chenier also, likes took a lot of shots too. So he took a more of a role. I think part of it probably just because of the fitting around his teammates. Part of it probably because he famously had really bad knees and probably focused on other things because the scoring probably was a little bit more challenging for him. But yeah, again, his career numbers: 10.8 points per game, 14 rebounds per game, 3.9 assists per game, don't really stand out. But, it seemed like more statistical profile. They're very different players. The statistical profile, Dikembe Mutombo kind of for the first seasons of his career, and then a little bit more Ben Wallace-ish, again, stats-wise. He even later in his career, he scored more than Ben Wallace did, but kind of in that vein, I think, in the past, the last 7-8 years of his career. But, one thing that he did, the advanced stats, limited for what they were. If you look at box score plus minus, you look at like 75 to 81, which is the back half of his career. If you sort by guys, about 7,000 minutes, guys who played multiple seasons during that time, he's 14th in the league in box score plus minus, which, again, second half of his career, it's not tracked before 74. That's pretty impressive to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think he's a guy, you mentioned like guys like Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace type. I see him in the same vein as and Ben Wallace. I think those are perfect. Draymond Green, I think as well, a guy that kind of fills in the gaps there. I know a lot of people liken him to Charles Barkley. I think Charles is a little bit different because Charles was such an influential figure on the offensive end. But Wes kind of fits that same mold too, where like you look at his body, you look at his stature, 6'7" is what he was listed at, but I think even he would say, I'm like 6'6" or a little under than that. But you see this a guy that could make the most out of that body, whatever it is, and that's a tremendous thing. And like that to me, the guys that I think of initially are like you said, your Ben Wallace types and your Draymond Green types, guys that really don't look the part of whatever position they're playing, but are just so skilled and so crafty and so good that they can do that. And those guys are two guys as well that the stats don't really maybe tell the whole story. The basic stats, the points per game, the rebounds per game, the assists per games, maybe don't tell the entire story. But then when you dig a little bit deeper and look at the value, the box plus minus, all that sort of stuff, you see the value that they have. And yeah, Wes, even though he wasn't scoring to super high levels in the last half of his career, you look at those box plus minus numbers, and you look at even value over replacement player, and you see that he was still affecting the game in so many different ways as well without even having to score even double digits. I mean, the last half of his career basically doesn't score double digits and is still leading this team in a lot of different categories and leading the team to unprecedented success. So yeah, it's really cool to have a player that was that good but didn't have to necessarily do it on the scoring end. And there are so few players in the league ever that have affected the game as well as Wes did without scoring a ton. So
sure, absolutely, yeah. And his quote from the Washington Post. He was asked once about his modest stats. He replied, "It's not my job to look good. It's my job to make other people look good." And that's definitely something that his teammates all talked about. How that he was really a great guy to play with. He was a quiet leader. Wasn't he was a tough guy, but doesn't. I couldn't find any anecdotes about like fights or about him being mean or being aggressive or whatever. He was just a guy who played tough but didn't need to be a tough guy, so to speak. But some other accomplishments in his career: 5-time All-Star. Oddly, we talked about this in a previous episode. He is one of a handful of players who made the All-NBA first team once and then never made an All-NBA team again. In fact, of course, he did that in his rookie season, the same year he was MVP. He's 13th all-time in career rebounds in the ABA NBA history, 7th in rebounds per game overall, 24th in total rebound percentage, if you better cross-era comparison. Third all-time in rebounds per game in the playoffs to Bill Russell and Chamberlain, which I thought was pretty interesting. As we talked about, he led the Bullets to 4 finals appearances in 9 years, including 3 appearances in 5 years. And he was the finals MVP in their 1978 title win. He made the playoffs 12 straight years after the team had never had a winning season before he got their first beginning as an expansion team in 62 in Chicago before moving to Baltimore and becoming the Bullets. And as we had noted in a previous episode, his teams won 3 pennants, regular season best records in his career.
Yeah, I did misspeak a little bit earlier when I said the Bullets had never made the playoffs in their franchise history. What I meant to say is they never had a winning record in their franchise history. They had made the playoffs in the late 60s, but they had 38-42 and then 37-43. Those classic under 500 playoff teams. But yeah, when he comes in, immediately gets the team up to 57 wins, and then they were pretty much there. I mean, pretty much the entire time he was a player there. 57 wins, 50, 42, a brief fall there, 38, 52, 47, 60, 48, 48, 44. I mean, really, the entire time he was there, 54, the year 1979. So pretty much the entire time he was there. And you can also look at it, too, by the time he's kind of winding down, that team is kind of winding down, and that franchise is winding down. And, I mean, the proof is in the pudding there. I mean, they have not been to an NBA Finals since then. So, and I don't think they've really have they come even particularly close? I'm trying to remember if they've I don't even think they made a conference finals at that point. They haven't. No, they have not even made a conference finals since Wes Unseld left the team. So, I mean, he's best player in that franchise's history. I think we can pretty safely say that, right?
I think Hayes, maybe has a case here. Hayes, probably, I would say Unseld probably slightly ahead, but it's close. But yeah, definitely those two stand out way above anybody else who's ever played for the franchise. And talking about kind of just the fact that the team won so much with him there, pretty much his entire career there. Curtis Harris wrote a profile of Wes, our good friend Curtis Harris at Pro Hoops History, wrote in 2013 that prior to Unseld joining there, they had a .364 winning percentage. With Unseld there from 69 to 81, they had a .580 winning percentage. And then after Unseld, up until 2013, they only had a .408 winning percentage. And since 2013, not a whole lot better, just 2 games over 500. So that isn't exactly, they haven't accomplished a lot since then. So, yeah, I mean, definitely by far the best, era that they had in franchise history is, basically his career. And, yeah, you can kind of split his career into, I think, three stages. And, other than his final year, they made the playoffs every year. They only had one losing season up until, the end of his career when he had obviously aged. And that was a year that they had, a bunch of injuries. But yeah, just, winning was, pretty much a constant in his career. And they had some excellent teams, some very good teams and some excellent teams during that time.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to it. We'll talk about it a little bit that he was such an important figure in that franchise's history that pretty much until a few years ago they wouldn't let that dude leave. You know what I mean? He was a part of that, intertwined with it, whether he was a coach, whether he was a GM, whether he was a front office, whether he was an ambassador, whatever. Like that, he became synonymous with this franchise, and we've touched on it in many episodes prior as well. But like certain franchises feel like they don't have a foothold, and this is the Washington franchise is kind of one of them. You go from being the Baltimore Bullets, you're the Capitol Bullets, you're the Washington Bullets. Oh, okay, now you're actually the Washington Wizards. It's just like for whatever reason that franchise doesn't feel, even though they do have a legacy. I mean, they've been around for many years and had success over the course of many years. But for whatever reason, they don't feel, you know what I mean? Like they don't feel like they have like any sort of, I don't know. They just don't seem to have a foothold. But West seemed to be that connection that franchise always made of like, okay, look, yeah, we've changed names, we've changed locations, we've changed, this sort of stuff. But West is the one constant throughout this all. Is Wes Unseld's been here with us, from not necessarily the beginning, but the beginning of our real success as an NBA franchise. And yeah, despite all those turbulent changes, it always felt like he was the constant in that Washington franchise, which yeah is desperately in need of some sort of historical identity that they don't really have.
Right. So looking kind of at, just a high level of his career, of course, he joins the Baltimore Bullets in the 1969 season. The team has Earl Monroe, who's in the second year, their star point guard, Gus Johnson, Jack Marin, Fred Carter, Kevin Lockery, and later Archie Clark. So, really good, solid group of role players, along with, Unseld and Monroe. And immediately in 69, Unseld as the only major new face of that team. They have a 21-game improvement. They win 57 games. They have the best record in the East. He is, as we said, the MVP and the Rookie of the Year that year. In terms of SRS, they were not quite as strong that year, and they were surprise loss to the Knicks that year. They were swept, in fact, by the Knicks in that series. Of course, the Knicks were very much on the same path with Willis Reed had just gotten David Busher and had young stars like Walt Frazier and Bill Bradley. These two franchises that had been pretty much a joke for most of the 60s were finally emerging roughly at the same time, and they would battle consistently in the playoffs every year for the next 6 years.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really cool, and yeah, this is the first of back-to-back years, and we'll touch on it here a little bit. Back-to-back years where the Bullets franchise feels like they got things together, and then the Knicks get in the way, and it'll be cathartic in 1971 when they do finally beat them. But yeah, it is interesting to see these two teams kind of rising up at the same time, and I guess that's also one of the issues with Unseld's career, which of course we'll discuss here moving forward, is that a lot of the times when you feel like it's his time to come up or be ready or whatever, there's somebody in the way. Okay, it's the Knicks now, they're rising. Okay, a few years later, he's ready to go. They beat the Knicks, they beat the Sixers, they're ready for the finals. Oh, here's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It's like, oh yeah, Kareem's better than he is. Yeah. So that's not going to work. And then it isn't really until and again we'll get to it here in a bit, but it's not until a decade later when he finally breaks through. But at that point, he doesn't feel like, to many people, maybe the top guy on that team, but then he proves it, with the Finals MVP or whatever. But yeah, that he did seem a little snake bit in that way, where there was always felt like there was somebody overshadowing his accomplishments, somebody that was always a little bit better or had a little bit more accomplishments than he did in a certain year. And it starts with this first year where he wins Rookie of the Year, wins MVP, surprise team, and then they just don't win a game against the Knicks, in the playoffs, and yeah, this would become unfortunately a little bit of a trend.
Sure. Yeah, the next year, 1970, 50 wins, but they again fall to the Knicks. This time in 7 games. This is the Knicks in the championship year for the Knicks for their first championship. Definitely the Bulls gave them a tough series, and continue that rivalry. 1971, things change a lot for this team. They deal with a lot of injuries that year. They only go 42-40, but they have a great run in the playoffs. They're able to upset the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals in 7 games. In fact, Unseld had 17 points and 20 rebounds in the Game 7 win, 93-91, to put the Knicks in the finals. But unfortunately, as you talked about, they run into Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Bucks, rather, one of the greatest teams in NBA history up until that point. I think SRS are still, first or second all time in terms of that. And they don't have an answer for Kareem, although, Unseld definitely played Kareem tough in his career, despite, the height difference. As we said, Unseld was able to, use his might. I know you, before the show, you talked about watching Unseld highlights and how, he really seemed to just have that knack for jumping at exactly the right time to get the rebounds.
Yeah, it was, I was kind of watching some highlights before we got ready to do this show, and one thing that really stood out to me is, and you see it, he's not like, he's not a dominant physical player in the same way that like your Wilt or your Kareem Abdul-Jabbars or those sort of guys were, but you always see like a shot goes up and you're like, how is this a highlight for Wes Unseld? Like, everybody else jumps up and they're all ready to get the rebound or whatever. And then out of nowhere, here comes, Wes Unseld with his arm, just kind of ready at the right time, pops the ball up, scores the basket. Or a bunch of these guys jump up, and all of a sudden, here comes Wes Unseld out of the middle of them, jumps up, grabs the rebound, starts a fast break. It was kind of remarkable, and I implore a lot of people to when you're listening to this episode and when you're done with this episode, just search, Wes Unseld on YouTube. You'll find a lot of the same clips that I was able to find, and you'll see just how remarkable his timing was. And that's something that we talked about, with the Last Dance episode with, Dennis Rodman, where he talked about how the art of rebounding, and it's not just about jumping high and getting the ball before anybody else. It's about knowing when the ball is going to bounce, knowing how the ball is going to bounce, knowing when the ball is going to reach the apex, when you need to jump at the right time or whatever. And Rodman was an artist at that, despite not being the tallest guy in on the court, or Charles Barkley, another one as well, who wasn't physically dominant, but always felt like he was getting rebounds over people that probably should have gotten rebounds over him. It's all about the timing. It's all about knowing when the ball is going to come off, knowing when to jump, knowing the right time to jump, all that sort of stuff. And watching those highlights of Wes Unseld, it was incredible to see him, even against guys like Kareem. Kareem's got the position, ready to go. He jumps up, and here all of a sudden, as the ball's about to fall into Kareem's hands, here comes Wes Unseld just bopping out of nowhere, boom, grabbing the ball right out of Kareem's hands and starting the fast break or something like that. And it's really cool to see that. And it really shows you, he shows you the art of rebounding and how it is so much more than just being physical and just being big and strong and positioning and all that sort of stuff. It really is an art form, and it's all about timing and just studying it and knowing where the ball is going to go. And it was really awesome to see those highlights.
Mm-hmm. So going into 72, in the offseason, Earl Monroe has a dispute with ownership that leads to him being traded after 3 games. So a lot of upheaval for that team. Gus Johnson's hurt. Lockery and Fred Carter are traded to the Sixers. They do get Archie Clark. But they're the only losing season of Unseld's career up until the very end seasons. In fact, 38 wins is the fewest wins he would ever have in the regular season, which not bad.
I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. They do make the playoffs. They lose to the Knicks in 6 games as well. So, and then kind of gets into the next era of Unseld's career, starting in 73, and their last year in Baltimore, they're 50-32 that year. They do get Elvin Hayes in the offseason, and it helps, of course, that turnaround. Other key players, Phil Chenier, who had been a rookie the previous year, Kevin Porter, Mike Reardon, Archie Clark, also there for a couple of those years. But again, they run into the Knicks and they lose in 5 games to the Knicks in the Knicks' second championship team.
Oh, damn Knicks. I always ruined it for everybody. No, that's, again, like we said, it's like this dumb, weird thing where Wes kind of seems like he's ready to go, and then, it's the Knicks. It's Kareem. The Knicks were a nemesis, man, for a few years there.
Absolutely.
He was more than ready to get those out of the way, but I don't think it's going to happen right away. So.
No. In 74, it's the last one. This is the Capital Bullets year. Casey Jones comes in as coach, replacing Gene Shue, who had been the coach for the Bullets since the beginning of Unseld's career. They win 47 games. This is Unseld's worst statistical year as he battles knee injuries, only 5.9 points per game, which is a career low. And the Bullets, they lose in 7 to the Knicks. This is basically the last of, the key Knicks. Reed had already retired. They still had Frazier and Monroe and Bill Bradley and DeBusschere, but or I guess Reed did play in this series, but then I think he retired in the offseason. Lucas, all those guys were basically at the at or near the end of their careers. Frazier, Monroe obviously had a few more years, but so that was pretty much it in terms of the battles against the Knicks. Then they 75 comes along.
Real quick, before we move on to 75, also the only year, we mentioned the 5.9 points per game, also the only year in Wes Unseld's entire career that he averaged less than 10 rebounds per game. 9.2. That lazy bastard. 9.2. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, by playing only 30 minutes per game, like you said, missed a bunch of games. Clearly the knee affecting him, but still finds a way to still get 9.2 rebounds per game. But yeah, the only time in his career he didn't have over 10. And most of his times, he wasn't even close as well. Like, when we say over 10, we're talking 18, 16, 16, 17, 15, 14, 13, 11, 13, 10. He's up there. It's not like he's just barely getting over 10. This isn't Jason Kidd triple-doubles here. Jason Kidd rebounds per game.
Yeah.
This guy is bringing in the rebounds. And, thankfully, gets healthy the next year, and the Bullets are off to the races. So
Yeah, bounces back. His final All-Star year, he leads the league in rebounding. They're able to put together, at least in the regular season, they win 60 games, which is Unseld's career high. They do great, at least at first in the playoffs. They win a tough 7-game series against the Buffalo Braves and Bob McAdoo in his MVP year. And then they beat the 60-win Celtics in 6 games. But then go to the finals, and they are swept again, this time in a very big shock against the underdog Warriors in the finals. It was weird because every game in that series was pretty close. Yeah. And Unseld had a great finals. He averaged 12.3 points per game, 16.8 rebounds per game, really stood out in those finals. But, not a good year or not a good finals for the Bullets anyway.
Two games decided by 1 point. Game 2, 92-91 Warriors. Game 4, of course, a very famous game in NBA history. 96-95 Warriors get the win and win the title. So it's like, again, they're so close. And even though games they lose, they're like, they're losing by 4, they're losing by 1. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, another time when it feels like it's all together, it feels like they're ready to go. And then, all of a sudden, here comes the Golden State Warriors, here comes Rick Barry. And they just blow them out of the water and sweep the series. And in today's NBA, there's no way that these guys get another chance after this. It's like, all right, back it up. It's all done. Wes, you're over here. Elvin, you're over here. Shanir, you're here.
Sure.
It's awesome that these guys stuck together for all these years, and we got what was coming in here in the future. So,
yeah. And that team also, in addition to the guys we mentioned, Nick Witherspoon, Truck Robinson, I think was a rookie that year and came in and emerged. Jimmy Jones of ABA fame also came in. So, fun team, and it obviously underachieved in the finals, but was a great team to watch. The next year, still a good team, 48-34, but then another heartbreaking loss in 7 games. This time, the Miracle at Richfield, losing to Cleveland in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Another upset loss.
Yeah, so they're in some famous games in NBA history. Unfortunately, they appear to be on the opposite end of most of those. Yeah, they're the footnote in a lot of really big games. The Miracle in Richfield, the Golden State Warriors miracle upset, Kareem's coronation, the Knicks, and it's like, there's the Bullets. They're there too. It's absolutely unfortunately at this point. And that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. That might be another reason why this franchise and Wes Unseld in general as well, don't feel like, despite the one championship, they don't feel like they really belong to any era. They don't feel like they're really, appreciated historically, because all these other notes in history, they're the other team. They're on the floor while all this other stuff is happening, and very rarely does it become them. And when it eventually does become them, which, again, we'll touch on here in a moment, when it does become them, it's kind of like, yeah, whatever, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, it's during probably one of the NBA's maybe lowest points in their history is when they finally achieve the dream that they've been trying to go for so many years.
Sure. Yeah, just the attention wasn't there in the league, obviously, in that time for the reasons we've discussed. But then starting a new era, 1977 through 1981, the Fat Lady Sings. Of course, the key players of this era beyond Unseld are still Hayes and Chenier. Bob Dandridge comes over as a free agent and immediately leads the team to big success. Also, they develop other young players like Tom Henderson, Mitch Kupchak, and Kevin Greavy. Bob Ferry was the general manager for these teams. He had a pretty impressive track record of building some nice teams, at least for a while. So, father of Danny Ferry as well.
Yeah.
77, they win 48 games again. They hired Dick Motta, who had been the Bulls coach in the offseason, fired Casey Jones. And they bring in Dave Bing, who, of course, had been a star for the Pistons. It was near the end of his career, but still was a stout scorer, though the fit wasn't great there. They end up beating Cleveland in the first round in a 3-game series, but then they fall to Houston, who was then in the Eastern Conference, in what is essentially Moses Malone's coming out party for the NBA, as he was really dominant in that series against the Bullets front line. Kind of talked during the offseason, like, okay, maybe it's time to split up Hayes and Unseld. Hayes was personality-wise could be a challenge. People sometimes didn't always care for how he acted, or, at least, for the media. So there are often calls to trade him, but they end up sticking with it in 78. Doesn't look good from the regular season. Only win 44 games, but in the playoffs, they make a huge run. They end up facing off against the Seattle Sonics in the NBA Finals after having beaten the George Gervin-led San Antonio Spurs and Julius Erving-led 76ers. Pretty stout series there. And they are able to beat the Sonics in 7 games. We've talked about this series on this team before, but and of course, Dick Motta creates the famous motto of "It ain't over till the Fat Lady Sings." Yeah,
it's a remarkable team because, you mentioned the 44 wins. I mean, you look at the other peripheral numbers, and it's like, this is not that great of a team. The 7th in the league in points per game, 12th in the league in opponent points per game. SRS, they're 7th in the league. They're .82 SRS. Like, you're thinking, right, well, what the hell? Offensive rating 10th in the league, defensive rating 9th in the league. You're like, all right, well, good little team, nice little playoff team. And they make this miracle run. Like, after all these years of dominance in the regular season, all these years where it looks like, oh, this is the best team, or, oh man, this is the team to beat. This was not the team to beat, and then it ended up being the championship year, which is, I guess another weird thing about Wes Unseld and the Bullets, as well as that the one year they finally did it was like the year where probably people least expected them to do it.
Right. Yeah. And obviously they were getting older. They were in their early 30s when guys start to decline, especially in that era. And it was like, oh, is this ever going to happen? And then finally, it happens. Unseld wins the Finals MVP, 9 points per game, 11.7 rebounds per game, 3.9 assists per game. In Game 7, he is 15, 9, and 6, and hits a couple of clutch free throws to seal the game. 79 regular season, kind of the last stand for the team. They actually are a lot better in the regular season, winning 54 games. They were first in the East, I believe, certainly first in their division. Then they have 2 tough 7-game series against the Hawks and the Spurs, who were then in the East. In fact, they overcame a 3-1 lead against the Spurs to win in the conference finals. But then they match up against Seattle again, but this time Seattle is fairly dominant, and the Bullets win in 5 games. And then 80 and 81, they win 39. They win 39 games each season as teams age and injuries catch up. The 81 season, Unseld's last, was the only time in his career that he did not make the playoffs.
Yeah, and you could see it winding down at this point too, and you can see the end of this franchise really in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of the same guys are still largely there, but you're starting to get the next group of Bullets in there. I know Rick Mahorn as a rookie in that final year. Wes Matthews, I know, comes in the league at that time as well. But yeah, at this point, it was kind of over. Elvin Hayes is 12 years into his career. He's pretty well done. And Unseld and Hayes were in the same draft class as well, in picks
right.
1 and 2.
1 and 2, yeah.
Yeah. So they're both, unfortunately winding down their careers at the exact same time. It's not like you can say, okay, well, Unseld's gone, but we still have Hayes. And it's like, no, these guys are aging at the exact same, point. And it's cool because you got their peaks at the exact same time. You got the rise at the exact same time. But unfortunately, the falls kind of come at the same time too. And yeah, both these guys are starting to really show their age and really starting to show that their time is maybe done, and this franchise is got to be looking towards the future and whatever that is going to be, and it's not going to be good. I'll tell you that. So.
No, it doesn't go well. That last year they had Austin Carr, they had Mahorn, as you mentioned, they had Super John Williamson for 9 games. That's quite a collection of characters there in that 81 Bullets team. So. Then Hayes ends up having like 4 more years with Houston and gets 50,000 minutes in his career. So yeah, he played a long time. So looking at some of the key games in Unseld's career, he had 8 20-point, 20-rebound games in his first season. I think he had around 30 in his career, including 21 points and 22 rebounds against Atlanta on Christmas 1968. And then on Valentine's Day 1969, 28 points, 30 rebounds. So,
I like holidays. Yeah, I like those holidays.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm a big fan of those. December 2nd, 69, he sets a career high with 30 points, also 21 rebounds against the Royals. In fact, that's one of 3 2020 games that he had in 8 days during that time. So, I mean, definitely he had a flurry. I mean, he never scored more than 30 points a game, which kind of surprised me a little bit. I mean, I would have thought he would have had, a handful that were higher than that, even though obviously he's not super known for scoring. But definitely those first 3 years, he does have a lot of, big, 20, 25 type games before, slowing down as the scoring average slows down.
Yeah, and again, we said like a lot of what worked for that Bullets team at the time too was their pace. I mean, they played at a very, very high pace. They were either first or second in the league, his first 2 years, and stayed in the top half of the league a lot of those years as well. And that with that comes a guy who sometimes can score, but sometimes, again, like we said, get a rebound and immediately pass the ball up and start the fast break or whatever. And yeah, that's going to always affect your numbers, but you do see those games sometimes, and you go through especially his rookie year and his first few years, those scoring explosions were there, and you see that, had the team maybe changed a little bit, or if he had said, hey, no, slow down, let me get down, let me score, that sort of stuff, that maybe he would have had higher, numbers. But it's cool that, we even had the quote where he said like, that stuff doesn't really matter to me all that much. I just want to win. And it's cool to see that, because he definitely sacrificed, some gaudy scoring numbers for the betterment of the team. And we see him here where he's absolutely capable of doing it at times. But yeah, just see like he was happy deferring, most of the time if he needed to.
Yes. March 29th, 1970, sets his career high with 32 rebounds, also has 9 points against the Knicks. This is Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals, and also held Willis Reed in check, only 12 points on 4 of 16 field goal attempts and 5 rebounds for Reed. So was able to at least outshine in the matchup on that day. Of course, Reed and Unseld, had lots of battles against each other. Another battle against the Knicks on April 11th, 1971. He had 18 points on 8 of 9 shooting and 25 rebounds in a Game 3 win against the Knicks. Of course, that being the series the Bullets were able to win to get to the finals. And then May 7th, 1975, Game 4 in the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston. Of course, the Bullets and the Celtics that year both having won 60 games in the Eastern Conference. And he has 16 points, 25 rebounds, and 7 assists against Dave Cowens to put his team in the driver's seat, putting them up 3-1 and eventually leading to them winning that series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then 78, we talked about already, the Game 7 of the NBA Finals. 15 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists. Hits the key free throws that ended up sealing the win in the final minute. Some from the Washington Post articles, was talking about, kind of the era that, talking about, of course, this series and this win. Before Game 7, Unseld, spoke to his teams in the Bullets locker room, His quote was, "This is my 10th year. This might be the last chance I have to win a championship. I just want everyone to know I'll be here for you today. I don't care what it is. You don't have to worry about anything." And then Dandridge said that Unseld, during that time, during that playoff run, he rode shotgun with everyone, vowing that he would grab every rebound and loose ball that he could. I also policed the team at his hotel before the game, telling Mitch Kupchak to just nap in when he encountered the power forward getting ice. And also, in addition to the clutch performance here, he also had a big in Game 6 again in the Eastern Conference Finals against Philly. He tipped in his own missed shot with 12 seconds left to give the Bullets a 2-point victory to win the Eastern Conference. So a couple clutch performances there during that playoff run.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, video of those games as well. And you could see, again, those numbers we mentioned there, 15, 9, and 6 don't really jump out at you and say, oh, my God, that guy definitely needs to be the MVP. But, go and watch those games and you'll see how much he's affecting everything on the court as well. And that's kind of been the theme of everything we've talked about here is really you need to appreciate just how much he influenced the game and influenced everything that Washington did, despite the fact that his numbers aren't as gaudy as they might seem, on its face. But yeah, you watch those games, it's particularly that Game 7, which is available, and I think you can find it many different places. Definitely go out. I mean, that's a really cool game too, because the crowd is just on fire for that too. I mean, the entire game, the crowd is just going nuts. Seattle's hungry for a title, Washington's hungry for a title. It's these weird teams that you're not used to seeing in the finals. It's just, I really recommend it. It's a really, really fun game to watch as well, and you'll see just how important Wes Unseld is, despite those numbers.
Mm-hmm. May 6th, 1979, again, the playoffs, Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Spurs, 26 points on 12 of 13 shooting, 22 rebounds, kind of probably his last big important game of his career. And then January 30th, 1980, 24 points, 20 rebounds against the Pacers, his final 2020 game of his career. And then also notably against the Pacers in his final season, November 14th, 1980, he made the first of 2 recorded three-pointers of his career. He only played 1 year with a three-point line, 1981. Both of them happened at Indiana in separate games. So three-point attempt records are spotty in 1980, but he only had one other recorded attempt, which was a miss against the Bulls, which means that, at least according to official records, he was 2 of 3 from a three-point line, which means that as far as we know, he was a 66% career three-point shooter.
I'm going to go with it. Yeah. So, I mean, eat your heart out, Steph Curry, Steve Kerr, all you losers.
Yeah.
66%. Let's see you make 66% of your threes. Then we'll talk.
Exactly. Right.
I like it. I like where your head's at there. So
okay. Yeah. Hey, as far as we know.
Right. You prove it. Prove otherwise, right? The onus is on you, person out there, to prove otherwise. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Prove it otherwise. Yeah. So, yeah. So yeah, I just to close things out, just a few anecdotes from his career. There's a great one from when he was a coach of the Bullets. He thought that Manute Bol wasn't quite giving enough effort. Manute Bol, of course, being 7'7". So Unseld confronted Bol in the locker room, lifted him off the floor, and jammed his head through the ceiling tile, which is a pretty great visual. I guess, like I said, the not many violent instances involving Unseld. I guess that would be a notable exception. So.
To be fair, though, I mean, even if you just lightly move Manute Bol up a few inches, he's going to go through. I mean, how many ceiling tiles did Manute Bol really break? I mean, is great. It probably was quite a few. Many not intentional as well. So I don't know. I mean, it sounds very very bad. Oh my God, he lifted him up. But I'm sure Manute at that point in his career was pretty used to breaking ceiling tiles. I don't know that many ceilings were made for men that were 7'7". So
it's a fair point, Rich. I'll give you that.
God, I wish there was video of that. That would just be awesome to see because just old Wes Unseld, a little bit of gray in his hair, just damn it, come on, man, come on.
Get up there and get the rebound.
Right. Here, let me show you. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So there's a remembrance from WDRB.com has a quote from Kevin Greavy that Wes giving a speech during the playoffs saying, basically, hey, we all want the championship. Elvin wants the championship. Mata wants the championship. Everyone else should want it. And then Greavy said, and then he looked at me and said, if I found out that anybody comes up with a case of the Georgetown flu, which is a reference to having a hangover, they would have to go see him. And then Grievey said, yeah, I was completely sober for 6 weeks while we had that playoff run. I wasn't going to even, I wasn't going to drink once because I didn't want to disappoint him.
I like the Georgetown flu. Never heard that before, but
that's it's a good one.
That's good. See, you got a college campus right there in the city. I mean, I get it, but I like it. Little Georgetown flu.
Nice.
Turns out when you Google Georgetown flu, it just comes up with Georgetown University Health Services warning people about the influenza. So not necessarily but we'll dig into this a little bit more and find out if is that a common term or maybe Wes's turn. I don't know. I do need to find that out.
I'm guessing it's probably more common in the area, but yeah, good question.
Curtis lives, he doesn't live there anymore. He still lives there, right?
Yeah, he does live. He lives.
Yeah, we'll have to ask if he's ever come down with the Georgetown flu. So. I don't know if he drinks or not, but he's heard of it. I'm sure. So
I'm sure he's heard of it. Yeah. So from the Washington Post, talking about how, again, of course, he wasn't a guy known for standout athleticism, but for things that he would do, like he would jump up, grab the rebound before touching the floor again. He would fling the outlet pass down the court and it would hit the backboard on the other end. He was able to do that with that amount of power and amount of quickness before he reached his feet to do that. That was really cool. And also talked about just the fact that he would his knees were so bad with arthritis that he would basically skip weeks worth of practices as well as pregame warm-ups, because really the only time you could tolerate the pain was for 2 hours of game time. Once he suited up just minutes after having 200 cubic centimeters of fluid drained from his left knee.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that is, but it sounds horrifying, and I don't want to find out how much 200 cubic centimeters of fluid drained from your knee is. But I'll just assume that's a lot.
It is, So I've had that much drained from my knee before, and I did not play a professional basketball game afterwards.
No,
and,
really?
And it's quite a bit. Yeah. So,
you didn't play professional basketball?
Yeah, I know it's shocking.
Wow, you learn something new every day. Okay,
yeah,
that's what I thought we were doing the show, but that's all right. We're two former NBA players talking NBA history, but okay, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then Baltimore Sun had a really good piece on some with a few good anecdotes there. I liked his reaction to being told that he won the MVP award. He said, "It's very nice, but I don't know whether I deserve it or not." So very understated reaction from Unseld. Ray Scott, who played for the Bolts on the early on in his career, said that he was the kind of player who would rather pass than score. He made us a smart team, a thinking team. It also said that we'd fool around and wrestle in practice. Once Wes picked up Leroy Ellis, who was 6'11", and held him over his head. It was a strong man's game, but never in his career was there a player stronger on the court than Wes. And he talked about his approach to defense. Basically, he'd play, guys like, Chamberlain, Elvin Hayes, Nate Thurman. The idea was that if I can just push him 2 feet away from the spot that, he's comfortable at, they're going to take a jump shot from a place they really don't want to. And, and I'm going to be able to win the advantage because they're going to likely to miss more of those shots than they want to. And then, I'm going to win the battle for the night. So.
Right. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Everything you hear about him, it was a guy who knew physically that he had his limits, that knew, hey, I can't fix the fact that I'm 6'6" or 6'7" or whatever, but I'm going to play center in this league, and I'm just going to be better at the little things than the other guys I'm on the court with. And it seems to definitely come true. And yeah, you hear these quotes about it. He was really studied the game, really artful about the way he approached the game. So it's really cool to hear those quotes.
Yeah. And then one more story from that same Baltimore Sun article. Jack Marin tells a story about that Unseld likes to play pranks, including one where when George Johnson was a rookie for the team, the one time Wes bought a rubber snake. He wrapped it in George Johnson's uniform and stuffed it in his gym bag. And then when George pulled his jersey out, he got quite the surprise there. I like to think that George Johnson got his revenge, in the 75 finals because he played for the Warriors in the 75 finals. So I'd like to think that, that George was, he really wanted to get revenge on Wes, during that finals.
Right. So, he's like, I got to get even with this guy. Let me tell you what he did. And it's like, it doesn't sound that bad, guy. He's like, no, it was terrible. I hated it. So, and Bree, did we touch a little bit on his coaching and GM years as well?
we can go ahead and do that. Sure.
Real quick. I mean, they weren't good. I mean, that's fine. It's okay.
No.
You know, yeah, they weren't that good. So it's all right.
No. Yeah,
better player than coach or GM, but hey.
Yeah, I mean, he coached the team from the late '80s into the early '90s, and then was kind of executive and general manager. I think he was general manager. I mean, I think he was kind of the general manager, team president. During I think up until 2003 or so. And yeah, it wasn't his strong suit. Not a great track record, unfortunately. Maybe he just wanted to keep like his era as the best era in Bolt's.
He did that quite well. Yeah,
right.
For sure. I mean, what's weird about that franchise in the history is you go back and look, and there was a lot of talent there. It just never seemed like it all could come together. I mean, there's the points where they have Chris Webber and Juwan Howard at the same team. They bring in Scott Skiles. You're like, yeah, this team looks like they look really good. The teams you look at them on paper, you're like, that's a really good team, and it's like, it's really not actually. For some reason, it's just not a good team. I don't know why, but yeah, you look at. It's not like he put together bad teams. It's just I don't know. Yeah, it just never. Yeah. They just never could get going for whatever reason during the the late Bullets era.
Well, the really weird thing about I'm going to pull up the franchise history real quick on basketballreference.com because it's really weird how they're not good or bad for like a really long time after basically '79, which is kind of the last year that they were any good with Unseld. But basically between I think it's. Yeah, but between 80 and 91, they never lose more than, I guess basically throughout the entire 80s, they never win fewer than 35 games, but they never win more than 42 games.
Right, just like completely stuck in NBA hell. They're just never getting good draft picks, never making the playoffs, or kind of making the playoffs but getting ousted in the first round. Yeah, never quite there. And yeah, even it's even true too of once after some real bad times in the early '90s. They finally acquire some talent. Your George Mirasads, your Chris Webbers, your Juwan Howards, your Scott Skiles, your later Mitch Richmonds that we talked about when they become the Wizards. And there's a brief period there. There's a brief period in 96, 97, 98 where they're pretty decent. 97 they make it to the first round and they're pretty tough. Competitor in that time, and then immediately that team gets broken up, and then it's another like 5 or 6 years until really Gilbert Arenas comes and whatnot. But yeah, you're right. There was that weird period where he got them like good, but not good enough. Just kind of in this weird kind of NBA hell is the best way to call it, where you're not getting those top picks, but you're not really making a sustainable run in the playoffs too, and it can end up really hurting a franchise for years to come by just doing that every single year, and they did for basically a decade.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just I don't think I've ever seen quite a run like that where for basically 11 years you are between those thresholds of not being good but not being bad. It's sort of an odd thing. So yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it for me, man. Yeah, this is it was kind of tough news to wake up to, and obviously there's so much else going on as well that it'll definitely get lost in the shuffle here. But yeah, Wes Unseld, the guy, all-time great NBA player, and I implore everybody listening to this, just watch some highlights, read up about it. Ask questions if you have anything. I'm kind of learning a little bit more about him in these days as well, and it kind of sucks that it takes deaths for us to always kind of appreciate guys a little bit more. But I think Wes Unseld's a guy that you and I have always sort of appreciated in some form or fashion, and in an era that the 70s that you and I have always really tried to through the course of this entire podcast history, really try to focus on and give some insights to. But yeah, hopefully people go and read about that era, read about Wes Unseld, watch some highlights, and maybe can help take your mind off some stuff for a few minutes.
Yeah,
just exactly. Not easy these days, but a few minutes of watching Wes Unseld highlights will, I guess, make you feel a little bit better. So
yeah, a beautiful outlet pass can build many bridges. So
exactly, absolutely, yeah.
Is that a good metaphor? Maybe not, but anyway, thanks everyone, of course, for checking out the show. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. We are a part of the Step Back at fansided.com. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are either on the platform, or if you want us to be on the platform, just tweet us or send us a Facebook message and we'll try to get on there. So thanks everyone for listening, and we're back again soon.